Welcome, everyone. Today's webinar will begin shortly. My name is Megan Wall, and I'll start off by running through a few housekeeping items. As we give folks a few minutes to join, feel free to use the chat to introduce yourself. Simultaneous interpretation in Spanish is available for today's webinar, provided by Tilde Language Justice Cooperative. Before we get started this morning, I'd like to ask their team to quickly walk through that feature.
Hi, this is Maria Sigourney. I'm one of the interpreters along with Lars. We're from Tilde Co-op, and we are going to be providing the interpretation service today. To access the interpretation tool, you will see an icon that looks like a globe at the bottom of your screens. If you're not bilingual, fully bilingual, we ask you to please access that tool in case someone speaks in Spanish so you can understand. Press that globe and then choose English. If you are on a tablet or cell phone, you won't see that globe. So you will see three little dots at the bottom right corner of your devices where it says more. Press those three little dots and then you will see a menu. You can go up and down that menu with your finger until you find the option language interpretation. Press that and then choose English and make sure you hit done to save your preferences. If you're going to be speaking today, please speak slowly and clearly for the interpretation, only one person at the time. I'm going to be repeating the exact same instructions, but now in Spanish. Buenos días, mi nombre es María Sigourney. Y estoy aquí con Lars, mi compañero, pertenecemos a la cooperativa de Tilde y tenemos interpretación simultánea en español. Si no entienden inglés, pueden accesar la herramienta. Si están en una computadora, van a ver un icono que se ve como un globo terráqueo en la parte de abajo de sus pantallas donde dice Interpretation. Presionen ahí, escojan español. Si no están en una computadora, no van a ver el globo. Entonces, van a ver tres puntitos en la parte inferior derecha de su pantalla donde dice More o más. Presionen esos tres puntos y se va a desplegar un menú. Pueden subir y bajar ese menú con su dedo hasta que encuentre la opción que dice Language Interpretation o interpretación de idiomas. Presione eso y luego escoja español. Y asegúrese de presionar donde dice finalizar o done para que se guarden sus preferencias. Si van a estar hablando el día de hoy, por favor hablen despacio y claro y solamente una persona a la vez. Si tienen cualquier problema con la interpretación, déjenos saber a través del cuadro de comentarios. Gracias. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Maria. So once again, good morning and welcome to today's webinar, Innovating to Build Climate Resilience and Local Capacity. Thank you for joining us. We have just over an hour together this morning with about 15 minutes or so reserved for audience Q&A. So we definitely encourage you to ask questions throughout the webinar by typing them into the Q&A feature or the chat box. Our team will monitor the conversation and do our best to get to as many questions as possible. The webinar is being recorded, so you'll have an opportunity to share it with your networks. Look for that recording in your inbox tomorrow in both English and Spanish. So as I mentioned, my name is Megan Wall, and I'm NCBA CLUSA's Program Director for the USAID funded Farmer to Farmer program, as well as a member of NCBA CLUSA's Strengthening Cooperatives and Producer Organization Practice Area. So our practice area gave a lot of thought to webinar topics that we wanted to develop. And we knew we had to address what is happening to our environment and how it is affecting the agricultural cooperatives and producer organizations that we're all working with. But more importantly, we wanted to allow space for a discussion on how to innovatively and effectively build climate resilience and local capacity. We've put together a panel from across the world whose organizations are doing great work in this space. Now I'd like to introduce the moderator of our panel discussion, Anne Vaughn. Anne joined the Biden-Harris administration in February 2021 and works in USAID's Bureau for Resilience and Food Security as a senior advisor for climate change. The Bureau for Resilience and Food Security works with a host of partners to advance inclusive agricultural-led growth, resilience, nutrition, and water security, sanitation, and hygiene in priority countries to help accelerate and protect development progress, including against the impacts of climate change. Prior to joining USAID, Anne worked at Mercy Corps, served as a field officer for USAID in Afghanistan, as a congressional staffer on foreign aid appropriations, and a Peace Corps volunteer in Nicaragua. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Anne.
Great, thanks so much, Megan, and really looking forward to today's event. Thanks so much for inviting me to speak and moderate this really exciting panel. And just a good morning and good afternoon to everyone. And could not reiterate and stress Megan's point about the importance of the topic of our webinar today on innovations, climate resilience, and local capacity. As you all know, climate change is already wreaking havoc on many communities, including here in the US and abroad. People are finding it ever harder to buy or produce food, get enough water to drink, and as a result, even stay healthy. Because of the urgency of the climate crisis, lives today depend on the creative solutions that we devise and do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and help communities around the world adapt to a changing climate. The importance of cooperative efforts and co-ops to innovate globally on adaptation cannot be overstated. The climate crisis is impacting everyone from Minnesota to Madagascar, and solutions have to be inclusive of diverse communities and environments. Cooperatives like NCBA CLUSA and really appreciate the forum we have here today are great for developing inclusive solutions, as cooperatives, just by your very nature, are formed by diverse people, have different opinions, and really importantly, bring local voices to the forefront. With a growing global population and a warming climate, we need to scale existing solutions, many of which will come from the ground up. We need to find more cost-effective, science-based technical solutions that protect water, soil, and natural resources and create the economic opportunity and empower local communities here and abroad. But while we are in a crisis can also drive innovation. The rush of urgency that we can feel in a crisis can often spur the innovation we need to confront the climate challenge, for example, but we really do need to act with some urgency. USAID's new climate strategy that we released on Earth Day highlights the importance of both the need for innovation, the empowerment of local actors, and the need for system level change, which we will need to confront the climate crisis and also many of the development challenges that are being undercut by the impacts of climate change. I'm really glad to see so many USAID partners in this virtual room today so we can learn from each other to advance both climate and food security goals. I'm excited to hear during the webinar, we'll hear from a host of actors working in sustainable sourcing, land management, biodiversity conservation, and climate smart ag. The organizations you'll hear from today are leading efforts to enhance local capacity in a variety of different countries, but we're also really eager to hear from the audience. So please do feel free to jump into the chat. And I did want to flag on the topic of innovation. I want to highlight something called the Agricultural Innovation Mission for Climate, which is also known as AIM4C, which is a new global initiative that USAID is excited to support. If you haven't heard of it before, it was launched at COP26 by President Biden of the United States and the United Arab Emirates. And AIM4C seeks to address both climate change and global hunger by bringing together participants to increase public and private investments in and support for climate smart ag and food systems innovations over the next 4 years, 4.5 years. By the end of COP26 back in November, AIM4C commitments from both governments and private sector partners reached over $4 billion in investments in climate smart food systems. The US government committed about $1 billion over 5 years, which includes USAID's contribution to the CGIAR system and our Feed the Future Innovation Lab efforts that advance climate smart food systems. We've now got over 40 countries and over 200 private sector and NGO partners that have joined to learn from each other and help advance the goal of having more climate smart food systems. And innovation, I think, as we all know, really requires collaboration, and AIM4C is a strong and growing platform that's helping build a community that looks at climate smart food systems. And since we're here talking today about agriculture and climate innovation, I'd encourage you all to check out the website. I'll put it in the chat in a second, and consider signing up as a partner or attending some of the events to learn more about this initiative that we hope will help spur more innovation. So with that, no further ado, I want to introduce a really great group of panelists. First is Francisco Donoso, is the Ecuador country director for the USAID-funded farmer-to-farmer program implemented by NCBA CLUSA. Francisco is an agronomist and psychologist, which is pretty exciting, specialist in agribusiness, master in personal development and leadership. He's got experience in international cooperative programs and general management in ag business, and has since 2019 been the country director for NCBA CLUSA in Ecuador, where he spearheaded the farmer-to-farmer program and cooperative development program initiatives. We'll also hear from Dr. Joanna Durbin, who's the chief of party of USAID's Mikaya project conserving biodiversity, establishing sustainable natural resource management, and promoting conservation-friendly businesses. She's got 30 years of experience facilitating community-led development, multi-stakeholder processes, and good governance for biodiversity, conservation, and sustainable development, with a lot of experience in Madagascar, the DRC, Cameroon, Liberia, and many other countries. Last but certainly not least is Ded Bujahari, who is the principal and head of agricultural practice at Statfa Consulting. He's an accomplished development professional with over 15 years of experience in program design and management, policy advocacy, and team management to help drive delivery of innovation and results-oriented solutions for agricultural development, food, and really importantly, we've got to talk about nutrition security too. Deb's previously held positions at a multitude of development agencies, including IFPRI, TechnoServe, Michigan State University, just to name a few. Now, without further ado, I'm really excited to turn it over to our esteemed panel. And we'll hear first from Joanna. Joanna, over to you.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. I'm just going to show myself to start and then turn my video off because I've been having a little bit internet problems. So let me just, excuse me. I can't see how to turn it off now. Anyway, I'll just carry on and hope it works. So, excuse me. Here we go, sorry. Hello everyone. I'm very pleased to be talking to you all from Antananarivo, or Tana, the capital city of Madagascar. USAID Mikadi is now entering its 5th and final year and operating in 2 landscapes in Madagascar. One of which is Mama Bay in the northeast. Please move on to the next slide. Thank you. Mama Bay in the northeast, which is the area I'll be talking about today. So if you click, you can see it's one of those rare and beautiful areas of the world. Click once, please, where the rainforest extends down to the ocean. It contains 2 of the largest forest protected areas with an exceptional diversity of endemic and threatened species like lemurs and palms, and the largest bay in Madagascar, which is a refuge for humpback whales and many other marine species. So click again, please. USAID Mikadi aims to conserve biodiversity and establish sustainable management of natural resources through a wide range of activities covering protected area management, strengthening land and resource tenure security, establishing resilient and conservation-friendly livelihoods to boost the economy in this extremely poor country, while promoting sustainability and biodiversity conservation through a ridge-to-reef landscape approach. So I work for Tetra Tech ARD, which is the lead implementing partner, and we work with Wildlife Conservation Society, NCBA, and also a mobile social enterprise, FIAMO, and a national civil society organization, MSIS. So if you click again, next slide, one of Mikadi's key activities through NCBA CLUSA has been to promote sustainable production of vanilla and equitable participation of vanilla producers in the value chain. Around 80% of the world's vanilla is grown by smallholders in Madagascar. and it's the country's major export and foreign currency earner. MCAGI is established, and we're now entering our fifth year, and we've established 22 vanilla cooperatives so far with over 7,000 members, and helped them to establish partnerships with vanilla sourcing companies, which have earned them over $3.3 million in revenue and facilitated over $1.5 million in private sector investment, including for certifications such as Rainforest Alliance, organic and fair trade. And then the cooperative members have also been supported to diversify their income generating. So they have a cushion against the risks of the really volatile vanilla market, things like marine products, fish farming, poultry, vegetables, tree nurseries, seaweed farming. So if we move on to the next slide, the farmers themselves have recognized that the surrounding forests and diversity are important to maintain the quality of their vanilla production and for their alternative income generating activities. And they've committed to 5% of the cooperative's revenues to conservation actions and established contracts with community natural resource management associations that themselves have contract with the government for management of forest and coastal areas. This mechanism has started to work already, and the first payments have been made and have been used for reforestation activities and for patrols. So if you click again, next slide, the vanilla from Mama Bay is purchased by many big brands, and those include companies like McCormick Spices, Nielsen Massey, Simrise, Valrhona, Danone, and others. Many of them recognize the importance of environmental health to maintain the quality of the vanilla and also the exceptional biodiversity in the area. And we are discussing with several companies that are willing to support the cooperative's initiatives by contributing funds for conservation and development. We're in the process of establishing conservation agreements, which have been used for similar purposes around the world as a payment for results mechanism, where continued payments and for conservation and then bonus development activities are conditional on meeting conservation targets. So next slide, please. I won't go into detail, but this schema shows how the private sector company, in this case McCormick Spices, channels funds through its local buyer or exporter Ramex through the protected, and then the funds go through the protected area manager, which is what WCS, and they play a support and oversight role. This is important because WCS has a long-term commitment to stay in the area as a protected, under a kind of contract for protected area management with the government, and way beyond the lifetime of our 5-year USAID project. And then these funds are then added to the cooperative's funds and then provided to the community associations. The cooperative monitors and reports with the support of WCS on the area restored, the reductions in the clearance of native forest, and indicators like the group size of lemurs, which indicate the levels of bushmeat hunting. So thanks very much. Next slide. I just want to say thank you. We're excited about the establishment of this sustainable financing mechanism, which should continue way beyond our USAID MCAGI project. Thank you.
Great. Joanna, thank you so much. That was great, and really excited to hear about more innovative financing efforts. So without further ado, we'll turn over to Francisco to hear from him. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Let me share my screen, please. Sorry, give me. All right, please let me know if you can see my screen.
Yep. Yep, Francisco looks good.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. And well, thank you everybody for attending to this webinar. And I will try to give you a briefly overview with the specific examples of what we do in countries to mitigate the climate change and for produce with more environmental friendly practices. So NCBA CLUSA and the USA, the Farmer to Farmer program, NCBA CLUSA is implementing the program in Peru, Ecuador, Honduras, and El Salvador, focused on coffee and cacao crops. Most of the topic areas that we collaborate with are in production and processing, marketing, finances, and organizational development. The implementation method that we use is our local staff select qualified cooperatives or associations and conduct a needs assessment. We find the volunteers with expertise in the topic area and select and conduct the assignments virtually or in person for 2 or 3 weeks, depending on the topic. And our local staff will conduct a follow-up and visit the organization to determine additional needs and see how the other trainings went. So, but today I will try to focus on environmental approach with the program that we are implementing and how the organizations get involved in this climate change to mitigate climate change. And I will present some trainings that we did in organic fertilizer and pesticide production or organic certification, or more with climate smart agricultural practices. But first of all, it's very important for us to have to understand the vision that we use, or that we have for a cleaner and sustainable production. So the most important aspect for us is to understand the necessities of the organizations or the communities or the areas that we are collaborating on, we are working with. So for the more important aspects of our sustainability is to really focus on a community needs, understand why and how the community is affecting the environment, then support them to achieve their goals in a sustainable manner that is good for them and for their environment. Now, we have seen from other programs that try to put our ideas on the communities without understanding their needs or why they are affecting the environment has not a positive effects. So that's our vision and that's how it works. So here are some, just to show you some examples of different very specific environmental trainings that we have did in Honduras, Ecuador, and Peru. I will not stop here. I will, this is, as you can see, very, very specific, but it's important to have in mind that the way that we work with our organizations is we want to produce their crops in an environmentally sustainable manner, and the project environmental resources, but their priority is to provide for their families, So it's our project goal to show that protecting the environment and making a decent living are not mutually exclusive. We help cooperatives, associations, organizations, and other groups to meet both economic and environmental goals by training on climate smart agricultural practices, organic production, organic fertilizers, etc. Climate smart and organic practices results in greater soil fertility, which leads to greater production on sustainable farmland. And this will increase the need for farmers to cut down the Amazon area, which we collaborate, we work in Ecuador and Peru, and search for more field land. So again, the idea is not only to collaborate directly with trainings that are focused on their environment, but we need to understand that also we can collaborate with some other trainings that are related to the environment. So in this specific example, for example, the organization is also PROMAS, and we did a training on organic certification. But for example, in this other one, is a POSI, is the name of the organizations. We focus on the digital marketing specialist, and how it relates to the environment is because they are trying to develop to sell the product they have, the organic and the products that they have, and they need the market, and they need to find a way to sell the products, because the value it has and the production of organic products are kind of higher. So these digital marketing specialists will help them to develop the web pages and sell the products through Instagram in this specific case. But also, for example, marketing, especially branding for this APKL is the name of these organizations. You can see the picture over there. They develop not only fertilizers from them, but the idea, and that's the goal they had, and they made it, is to use organic fertilizers, not only for the members of the organization, but also to sell it to the other organizations or farmers in the area. And that's also a way to promote the use of this type of fertilizers and more environmental friendly practices. Again, I'm going back from what I mentioned at the beginning. We need to understand the necessities of the organizations. So we also did, and they need, for example, resources to get certified organic certification, that kind of stuff. So in this case, we help them with some grant management training, so they get access to the funds to get their organic certification. So the main point, and just to finish, is if we really need to understand the agriculture and how it relates to the environment, we need to focus on the community's really necessities and needs. We need to understand that most of the practices that they do that can affect the environment is because of the needs they have. We need to incorporate and adapt the technology that we have in order to help them to produce in a more friendly way and to mitigate the climate change, and include the local knowledge also to understand what they are doing and how they do, and the resources they have to do the practices and produce in a more sustainable and climate friendly way. So that's my presentation. Thank you for that. And
great. Francisco, thank you so much, and excited to dig into questions and maybe hear also how much more farmers can earn too with the organic certification, because of the value add of getting that certification is pretty exciting. But for right now, we're going to turn to our last but not least panelist. Deb, over to you to hear about your program.
Thank you so much, Anne. And I don't have a presentation. On the intro of this topic, I will have like 4 critical sections. I'll talk about my organization, where I'm like working, what it does. And the topic is more on how the investment space in the climate resilient agriculture is setting up in South Asia. So I'll talk about that. What is the, opportunities, what are the challenges? So I'm also right now in a bad network area. So I'll just switch up my video and I'll share with you I'll be in the audio mode. So basically, I think I represent an impact consulting organization called Satwa, based out of India and spread across 25 countries, whose mission is to end the poverty in our lifetime. we do research, advisory, program management, impact assessment, in close collaboration with foundations, corporates, philanthropists, and non-profit organizations, government and multilateral organizations. Now, let's understand, I think, the topic of role of investment in the climate adaptation in agriculture in South Asia. Now, South Asia has experienced a long period of robust economic growth, averaging 6% a year over the last 20 years. However, these long-term development gains are increasingly threatened by the staggering social and economic impacts of climate-related hazards. Now, as per the World Bank estimates, the climate change could result in 62 million people in South Asia region being pushed below the extreme poverty line by 2030. Now, this is definitely alarming for all of us. Now, both donors who are investing in this space and there are also impact investors, both of them are coming forward right now on climate adaptation investments and emerging investment focus areas like blended finance. Now, donors like whether it's like Rockefeller, whether it's Gates Foundation, all the big donors across the world, they typically support long-term projects in the form of project implementation, research required in this space, the policy analysis. These are things which the donor focus. Now, what impact investors are doing, they are supporting startups to develop and test innovations, different business models which can have climate resilient agricultural practices, and how those end products can be used efficiently by the producers or farmers across the world, specifically in South Asia. Now, what some of the key focus areas which both donors and impact investors are focusing right now in the climate adaptation in the agriculture sectors are food system approach, climate smart agricultural technology and practices, sustainable agriculture, and this includes natural water resource management, sustainable livestock production, crop residue management, even research and development on the improved crop and livestock management practices. Now, some of the emerging focus areas also are coming up, and those are how to do carbon trading and carbon financing, which are new as innovation tool to bring capital into the space, which will promote climate resilient practices. The other emerging areas are remote sensing and geospatial analysis tools for climate risk management. And also third, I think the other emerging areas are simplifying the climate adaptation and risk language for ecosystem. Most of the time we have seen this entire climate adaptation subject itself is very jargonistic, right? So these are very complex jargons, as a result of which not everyone understands, or there is a need probably, I'll say, that simplifying the language for each of the stakeholders, which a farmer, which a government ecosystem, or even the financial institutions can understand and then support these entire practices. So this is where, and I'll pause and look forward to further deepening questions on this segment.
Great, Deb, thanks so much. I think we will have some good questions for you. Let me maybe start back with Francisco, and would love to hear from you, Francisco, are there ways to measure how some of the interventions that you were just talking about in the agricultural value chain impacts positively on the environment? How can we measure these things?
It's again, it's important to understand the organizations or the associations and the business they have and the problem they are facing. So in most of the cases, when we see, let's take an example for a cacao producer. They keep increasing their land, by doing deforestation, and cutting the jungle. And a way to measure how our intervention, our impact is measure the efficiency that they are having per hectare or per area of production. Let's put on a very more specific example. And most of the farmers, they have let's say a production of 4 quintals per hectare of cacao, but so that's very, very low. And with our intervention or our trainings, with technology, incorporating technology, helping them to understand more how the nutrients work, and you know, they reduce the area of production and become more efficiently and have better results. So with more technology, they can produce at least 35 or 40 quintals per hectare. And you compare that for 4, you know, is 10 times more what they were producing just, you know, by, you know, cutting the trees and planting. So it's very important to understand also the business part and the value chain so we can measure, you know, the really impact of what we are doing.
Great, thanks, Francisco, and really pretty impressive numbers there. So it's exciting. Deb, let me turn back to you. And something that's really a hot topic right now, especially in the lead up to COP27, where our COP27 host in Egypt will have a day on climate and, on adaptation and agriculture. And we're really looking at agricultural financing. Would love to hear from you. What are the key challenges investors or donors are facing in climate adaptation and agriculture? What's preventing more money from be it climate finance or just regular private finance from going into climate smart agriculture? Over to you, Deb.
Thank you so much, Anne. And I think this is really, a relevant question. And this is something which everyone is concerned about. I think that, yes, while this space is emerging, but there are like some of the key challenges which both impact investors and donors are facing while designing such climate adaptation practices in agriculture, right? So one of them is the disintegrated agricultural markets. Now, as you know, the agricultural markets are, I think, influenced by a lot of intermediaries, and the length of the agricultural markets indirectly results into like food waste, decreasing the efficiency in that value chain. Now, the more you reduce the value chain, that's where I think we'll curb the emissions. Now, how that can be done is, now, yes, there are emerging solutions like digital market platforms. And thanks to the last decade where a lot of ag techs or startups are coming up with the innovative marketing solutions. However, I think we have not seen success in terms of a scale-up model because by nature, these markets are not inclusive. When I say inclusive, this doesn't include smallholder farmers, women farmers are like, I think, not included in that domain. So we definitely need to, I think, work on that. But this disintegration in the agriculture markets is definitely one of the challenging. Now, the other challenging area is the common metrics in the climate adaptation, right? So there are a lot of jargons floating around which are talking about. So basically, the lack of common financial metrics for effective communications between the financial institutions and the small and medium enterprises or any startups, causing an uncertainty in the decision making by the lenders. And the heavy jargons in the climate financing is also creating a hindrance for effective communication between the stakeholders. And and the space is evolving, but this is definitely one of the like challenging areas. Like I think this need to be addressed. And the third is I think this is an innovative financing product. Like I was talking about blended finance, and this is very much in context to India, but I think this is also relevant in a global context. Now, blended finance definitely has an emerging it's an innovative financial product which will de-risk the climate adaptation investment for financial institutions because it basically for impact investors, this is the debt capital which someone will provide. So the risk of infusing the capital will be taken care of. So that brings a lot of people pumping in the money. However, this is very context to India where the apex like governing body for the financial institutions, which is the federal bank, which is called Reserve Bank of India, recently identified that high operational risk in digital lending through the fast loss default guarantee model. Right? So this is where that's the reason the federal bank is saying that the regulated entities should not be allowed to extend any arrangements involving the synthetic structures such as the fast loss default guarantee in digital lending platforms. This is definitely, I think it's an hindrance right now, but I think there's a lot of works happening, there are a lot of roundtable discussions happening, and I think we're looking for a clear set of rules which will allow blended finance. And that's the reason I think a lot of venture capitalists, impact investors will be pumping more money, which will bring more innovation, research, and even more adoption. So these are the three, I think, challenging areas right now with both donors and impact investors are facing.
Great, thanks, Deb. That was really appreciate the specificity of those examples. John, let me turn to you and also share in the context of USAID's climate strategy. We are real excited to have a target of helping leverage 150 billion in climate finance by 2030. So any mention either of what Deb was just talking about or also the project that you were highlighting with Vanilla on how we can leverage in more financing for climate smart efforts is greatly appreciated, and we're excited to learn from those efforts at AID to help reach our big targets. But would love to hear from you, what gives you the confidence that this conservation financing mechanism that you highlighted will continue into the future? How is it going to be sustainable?
Thank you. Yes, and just to comment on what you just said, we all know that it's very important to leverage private sector finance and not just rely on public sector. So here's an example. So why do we think it will continue? I know the diagram I showed looked a bit complicated with so many different actors involved, but in fact, they all have an important role to play in ensuring this is successful. They need each other to succeed. And these conservation agreements establish a kind of transparent structure and mechanism for collaboration. So for the private sector, like McCormick, they want a sustainable source of high quality certified vanilla. And they, for vanilla, particular kind of crop, a bit like cacao, it's worth it for them investing in the capacity of producers and their livelihoods and ensuring, environmental health. And then it's easier for them to work through a structure than individual producers. So working through the cooperative really makes sense to them. And then from the cooperative's point of view, they are, as I mentioned, recognize that a healthy environment and the long-term partnership that they can build with these responsible sourcing companies, private sector, will help them in their long-term sustainability of their economy. And so they need the community environmental management, natural resource management associations. Because the cooperative members can't just protect the forest on their own. They need these structures that have a government mandate to manage the forest. And then these community natural resource management managers, they have the agreements with the government to manage these areas of forest surrounding the protected area, but they lack resources. They lack funding to take time off from their work to go and do patrols or to take time to and purchase maybe the young plants for restoration. So and they also lack oversight. The government technical forest service doesn't have the resources and so doesn't provide the oversight and the regular monitoring that would motivate the community associations to continue. So the protected area manager, WCS in this case, supports the community managers, but they want to maintain the protected area, but they want a broader community support, not just the few people in the management association, the whole community. And so by working with the cooperative, that brings a lot more of the community in, not just working, only with the protected area managing the natural resource management. And I don't know if you remember, I mentioned there was a steering committee. So the commune, which is like the government, the local authority in the area, they're on the steering committee because you can't make this work without the local authorities kind of supporting it and being part of it. So and that steering committee is, one thing I didn't mention earlier, but I think is very important, is that once a year, there's a public meeting where the cooperative and the Community Natural Resource Management Association present the results to the whole community and back to the private sector and to the government. And so, you know, this is, it's a way of building like a transparent reporting, monitoring, and accounting system where everybody in the community can come and hear, oh, well, we got this money from the private sector and it was used to do these activities, you know, tree planting and as a result of that, we met the target and we're going to get a community development project. And they get to choose what the community development project might be. They might have priorities for, you know, patching the school roof or, you know, some income generating activities. Anyway, I won't go on more now, but it looks complicated. We really believe it's going to work because the private sector is signing up to a long-term commitment, you know, but with each year's development funding or continued funding is based on results from the previous year. Thank you.
No, thanks. It's really helpful. I was, as moderator, was gonna take the opportunity to ask one more question that for each panelist to respond to, but I think we've got really good questions in the chat and in the Q&A section. So maybe I'll ask our panelists to try to be a little bit brief so we can really make sure we get to our participants' questions. So question for each of you, and let's start, Deb, let's start with you. And then, but again, this will be for everybody. Would love to hear, based on the projects that you work on, where do you see the most environmental needs? And then what innovations is your project or are you all working on and developing to help tackle these pressing needs? So over to you, Deb, but Francisco and Joanna, you'll be up next.
Thank you so much, Dan. Again, being an impact consulting organizations and working with diversified stakeholders into the space. And moreover, I think we also have like a knowledge creation, I think, agenda where we work with different stakeholders for addressing this similar problem holistically. And I think for addressing this climate adaptation and innovation, I think basically there are like four-pronged approach, which I'll talk about. One is standardization of language, right? So donors and impact investors are using almost like different terminology in programming and advocacy. And due to lack of standardization across the ecosystem on climate adaptation language, and that's where I think in order to better collaborate and foster efficient partnerships, it is recommended to develop a common terminology to discuss climate adaptation in agriculture within the broader ecosystem. And that's the first agenda. And the second one, which we are planning to do, is the impact reporting framework for the financial institutions. Now, the investor ecosystem struggles to work with financial institutions or banks due to the poor reporting structures available to measure the climate adaptation. Now, an impact reporting framework is required to measure the impact of interventions on soil, water, carbon, and the environment. And that's where the reporting structures comes. The third proposed solution would be simplifying the risk for the farmers. Now, many farmers do not understand the risk of certain agricultural practices due to use of technical language in program implementation and the nature of adapting to a set of certain conditions. Therefore, it is recommended to develop a more simplified way of communicating with farmers to ensure buy-in on climate adaptation programs. And the fourth one is the carbon markets, or precisely the carbon trading. Now, at present, there is no standardized discovery and trading platform for carbon credits in most of the developing countries, including India. However, a wide range of interventions like in the developing countries are happening for promoting agricultural techniques that result in sequestering of carbon and reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. Investors are increasingly interested in developing an infrastructure for carbon trading in partnership with large corporations and commercial business. So these are the, I think, four-pronged approach. One is like simplification of the language, the need of the impact reporting framework for the banks and financial institutions. Third one is simplifying risk for the farmers. And fourth one is how to promote carbon markets in a developing economy. Thanks, Anne.
No, thank you. Really appreciate it. And sometimes we do have just a definitional issues on what climate smart ag is in the first place. So we've got a lot of work to do in that, but appreciate those recommendations. Francisco, over to you for the same question. What where do you see the most environmental needs, and then what innovations do you think are going to help tackle those needs? Over to you.
answer the second question. I mean, incorporate technology is very, very important for agriculture, especially for small farmers. Again, I like to explain things with using specific examples that, again, for thinking about a small producer of coffee, if he just, in the process of harvesting and, and getting the final product and the coffee, you have some waste that you produce, like, so for example, that's called honey waters is, kind of the translation. So if we work with them and teach them, and we are doing a project like this in El Salvador, and make this water become a fertilizer, which is, is a project, a specific project that we have that has been a very strong success. So in that way, you don't affect the environment, because otherwise this water is going to go through, through the small rivers or water resources in the area. It's going to affect that, it's going to pollute that water. So that's not a specific way to do it, is find the technologies to help farmers and small agriculture producers do not affect the environment, or affect it in a different way. So answer the whole question, there is more than the needs is to understand why these things are happening, not from our I'm sorry, but not from our desks or from us as consumers, talking about myself, going to the supermarket and buy a product and say, like, hey, why is this not, environmental safe? Or I'm not buying this because, this affects the environment. No, we need to understand that there are needs behind those products, and the way to help them is, understand why they are doing the things and incorporate technology and knowledge to mitigate those problems.
Great, very important reminder, Francisco. Thank you. Joanna, over to you. What are some of the biggest environmental needs, and how are you going to tackle them? Though I think you've given us a good teaser with the innovative financing work, but any other thoughts on that question? Shoot, Joanna, I think you're off mute, but we're having a hard time hearing you. Can you hear us? Maybe we'll give her, I know
Hello, I'm having a little.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing you, so I hope that doesn't mean you have trouble hearing me. Maybe it does.
Nope.
Raise your hand, Anne, if you can't hear me. But so I mentioned that Mikaji takes a landscape approach. Okay, good. The biggest environmental issues in our area are really due to deforestation for small-scale agricultural expansion. And that leads in the areas outside and far from the forest, leads to kind of soil impoverishment, and also local climate changes in the heat of the area, which the vanilla grows better in the more shaded areas up near the forest. So and vanilla and many, all the other diverse livelihood activities. So just controlling this deforestation and reducing hunting for bushmeat and overfishing. We're in an area where a lot of the protein comes from fishing, from the ocean. So and why do we have those problems? A lot of it is to do with the lack of basically collaboration to agree on and apply rules. So, in many countries, those rules are set, through government regulation and whatever. But I've already mentioned that in Madagascar, the government services are lacking in funds, and there's also a high level of corruption. So, what is needed is a way of tackling that through empowerment and partnerships, like I was explaining, so that producers and communities who recognize the problems can implement some of the solutions themselves. With partnerships, as I mentioned, through responsible companies that are sourcing from the area, who are willing to invest in and maintain support for these initiatives, and also, NGOs and others who are working, in a long-term way to support the producers and the farmers and communities. Anyway, I'll stop there, but I've tackled the problem in a slightly different way. Thanks.
Great. No, thanks very much for that. And we have really a great group of participants who are asking some really good questions. So let me maybe throw 2 or 3 out to the panelists. One is if there's what's been experience with livestock with silvopastoral mechanisms as a way to mitigate climate change is one, if anyone could speak to that. And then we actually got 2 questions, similar questions on how co-ops have added reforestation programs where members are paid to plant carbon absorbing trees. If so, how are these programs funded so that farmers are doing as well as planting trees for habitat restoration, and also, either getting funds and or crops and food security from that. So a reforestation and a silvopastoral conversation, question for the group. And anyone want to tackle either of those questions? Deb, you were nodding. Maybe I'll put you on the spot. Or Francisco, you came off. Francisco, please chime in.
Yeah, I can talk about the silvopastoral production. So, for example, in the areas of the Amazon area here in Ecuador, in Morona, Santiago, one of the provinces, how it used to be, long, very large areas of, with this grass that is not efficient for the cows. So, you need a huge amount of area where you have, 1 or 2 cows and your production is very, very low. It's 4 liters per day in talking about milk. So if we incorporate another type of grass with another technology, and we use silvopastoral, system to bring shadow to the cows because of the heat and that kind of stuff. So you can get to produce at least 10 or 14 liters per animal, and that's again, if you compare, that's very, very, the difference is very high. So yes, silvopastoral systems work, but you need to incorporate not only just the idea, you need to incorporate the technology, the grass, the food, how it works, and a lot of stuff, and that's the necessities they have. So again, understand the necessities is going to help us to mitigate the climate. Climate change and those sort of things.
Deb, go ahead.
Yeah, and so I'll take about the next one. That's a great question. I think the question talks about how the co-ops have actually focusing on the reforestation program and what is basically the financing mechanism works for sustainability, because there is a remuneration by nature from the program income for the farmers, right? So from my experience of designing similar programs, this is what we call, I think, agriculture, horticulture, forestry ecosystems. So the whole concept is diversifying your production risk. So not only your crops will be your, I think, feeding your house, but in case of any climate uncertainty, then there are the intermediary crops, which is grown between the crops, that can be taken care of, and the forestries. Basically, this is where the reforestation, the forestries on the bonds of the farmer land will take care of a long-term income generation activity apart from the carbon sequestration activities there. And also the leaves falling from that forestries on the grounds also indirectly used as biomaterial, or I think the manure for the plants. Now, how these actually programs are funded? The success rate of such programs depends on how the farmers are integrated into the program design. If the farmer is cash or kind, it is very difficult to bring some financial contribution from the farmer. Ideally, the farmer or the household should be involved in terms of in-kind contribution to the program. For example, I think out of $100 program interventions where we are providing fencing, then we are providing some training practices. Ideally, the farmer household should contribute at least the trenching, right? Basically the first manual labor which is required to dig the pit, and you put that, I think, manure and plant the tree. The whole idea is if the farmers are involved in small activities, then the ownership comes there. And the other level, I think, financial supports can be from the government, from the corporate institutions, but ideally, I think 25% of some level of percentage of contribution, cash or kind, give the sustainability of the practices. They believe, oh, this is for us. We have invested into the program. And this really goes long way. Even if the program gets stops because of the funding, the community takes care of that, I think, interventions, because from the day one, they are part of this program. So that's what I think I would say. I think community is critical, and their contribution to similar programs, even if it's like minuscule 25% cash or kind, that's a long way to go. These are all successful programs in the long term.
Great, thanks, Deb. I'm going to drop in the chat a tool that USAID worked with the CGAIR system to fund that looks at different types of feed for livestock and how it actually reduces methane. But for the food security component, how important it is, you can see what type of different feeds help increase milk production too. So hopefully that can be a resource for some of the questions on livestock. But then there was also, Francisco, for you, I think there was a question that looked at maybe, and actually Joanna and you, actually, so Joanna, how do the vanilla cooperatives determine the specific conservation activities to fund? Good question. And then also Francisco, if you want, or Joanna, on how conservation agreements support certain certification standards. Do these conservation agreements support certain certification standards? Joanna, can I turn to you first?
So hello, I'm having trouble, my audio is coming in and out, but I heard some of that. So in terms of how do they decide which, how do the cooperatives decide which activities they can, conservation activities to fund? Well, it's made clearer because each of these community natural resource management associations that has a contract with the government to manage an area of forest surrounding the protected area, they already have an agreed set of activities, a management plan that has been developed and approved by the Forest Service. So that, basically the cooperative supports the community association to implement their management plan. But in all of these places around the protected area, it involves some restoration of areas that were previously deforested, and also patrolling to keep track of what and prevent further infractions and problems, and report back on those. So, and the presence of people who have a job to do the patrolling really helps, both provides, is a motivation for the communities, but also helps to prevent further forest loss. So, and then as far as which certification programs, or are there any certification programs linked to the conservation agreement? There's no specific link. There's an indirect support, I would say, because, not causing deforestation or not being involved in deforestation is one of the requirements for Rainforest Alliance, for example. So there are quite a few kind of environmental requirements in various certifications that would be supported through this improved environmental management, but they're not directly linked, because the conservation agreements that I talked about are not about how the vanilla is produced or how the crop is produced, but they're about how the community area is managed in terms of environmental protection and management and conservation. Thanks.
Great. Francisco, do you want to chime in about certification also?
Yes. So at the end of the line, certification is gonna bring markets, or different markets for the producers, and that's other ways of income. So it's not only organic certification with works for some associations, but for others no. But if you have other certifications, there's a lot of them in the market. It's gonna allow the producers of the cooperatives or the associations to access to markets. And sometimes the problem is that these get the certification is not only a paperwork, it's something that you have to do in the field. You have to have the resources, you have to understand the technologies, you have to understand the needs, you have to incorporate and other ways of produce, so it's a lot of steps, a lot of work, and takes plenty of time. So that's resources, and that's something that organizations need. But yes, the work with some of these certifications are going to allow the organizations to access to market. But again, is not all the certifications are for all the organizations.
Great, thanks, Francisco. Then we have, I think, two big picture questions for the group. One is on how the current, excuse me, as I go through chat, how we're currently seeing and what we're seeing in terms of latest food crisis because of Putin's invasion of Ukraine and the food security crisis that is the second and third order impacts of that invasion and war. And excuse me to the questioner, I didn't get the question exactly right, but that also leads to a good question we've got from Theo about sustainability and natural resource management, and what kind of international advocacy can develop sustainably inclusive market systems, and how to reconcile the protection of natural resources in conflict zones where communities and companies are confronted with the absence of government and regulation, and there's exploitation of products such as cocoa, coffee, and minerals that ultimately finance armed groups. So two good big picture questions. If I could just share from USAID's perspective, I'll put it in, drop in the chat, some of the work that President Biden just announced at a G7 summit that highlights all the investments in food security, both on the humanitarian side and then to support mid and longer term development to help communities be more resilient to this and future food security shocks. But may turn over to the group to hear specific examples from your programs, maybe in how your communities are dealing with the current strike, a shock to the food systems, and then would love solutions to the really good question that Theo asked about resource exploitation, et cetera. Any takers?
I can go, very brief. There is something that USAID does very, very good, so bring resources and technology is something very strong from the program that we have in Ecuador and, with NCBA CLUSA, with farmer to farmer. I'm pretty sure it's the same in most of the countries, but, resources and technology are kind of the glue to solve the both problems that I understand you mentioned, So if we have this problem with Ukraine and that kind of stuff, so there are some other countries, that kind, let's talk about corn here in Ecuador, we are not a country that produces a lot of corn, but with the support on, and technology, again, we can rise the efficiency of the producers here, and at least we can, try to reduce that, that amount is not coming from, from the countries, especially from Ukraine right now. So, again, technology and resources is, two ways to solve this. At least mitigate these kind of problems.
Great, thanks. Deborah, Joanna?
And I just what Francisco has already talked about, I just want 2 pointers there. And this is from my past experience of working with CGI institutes, with the I think when it comes to food security, but I think you also want to make the climate resilient practices. Basically, at the end of the day, farmers want to ensure that yield, right? So I think the productivity is definitely important when you're struggling for food insecurity. So I think you need to have enough food. So that's the reason the productivity of the crop is very much important, right? So however, I think world situation where you do not have, I think, opportunity to grow, right? And then you also have not only the food insecurity issues, but there's a nutritional deficiency because of the entire supply chain has got distorted, you have lesser resources. And this is where the new concepts coming up, right? This is where the pathway to address the hidden hunger is again, concepts like biofortification, where not only the farmer grows the same wheat, but this nutrient-rich wheat, which is called zinc wheat, now that will take care of the productivity, that will take care of the climate resilient practices. And also, when you consume this zinc wheat, with change in color, change in taste, you get that micronutrient which is deficit. So the zinc deficiency will be taken care of by just consuming that zinc wheat. So right now, USAID actually is very keen. Currently, I think they're working in discussions with the CGIAR in India in terms of how to grow biofortified zinc wheat, and that can be supplied to, I think, the region where this is not growing, especially in the Ukraine area. So that's where I think one of the innovation which Francisco is talking about, I think one is the R&D, think out of the box, talk about the, I think, food system approach, which is very, very critical. I think that will taken care of your like food security is take care of the, I think, climate resilient practices, but also the nutritional deficit in the systems.
Great, thanks, Deb. Joanna, I know you're having audio trouble, so just please jump in whenever you feel like it. We only have 3 more minutes. I want to flag for the rest of the participants a good comment we've got from, I think, Robert Flick about we're using forestry, agroforestry, that will, Robert, if you want to stick in the broader chat to everybody, or we can move over, because I think that's an exciting way to look at the reforestation question, afforestation questions that were raised earlier about how to incentivize greater planting of trees. And then we've also got a good question in the chat from Alaska about how cooperatives might be able to help, that would appreciate panelists maybe taking a look at and answering in chat. And with that, I think we have covered a lot of the questions from the audience. And I really just a huge appreciation to the audience for good questions that have helped drive, I think, a really great panel discussion, and a huge appreciation to our panelists who have answers for everything. So thank you all for the work that you're doing. If there's any one last takeaways that anyone would like to make, Francisco or Deb or Joanna, I give you 30 seconds for any last thoughts or answering any of the other questions. Go ahead, Francisco.
Yes, just talking about the forestry system, like one of the questions over there. So again, we have to have that in mind, you know, like there are some crops that, for example, cacao, coffee, avocado, some fruits that, you know, that are crops that perennes. I don't know if that's I'm sorry, I don't know if that's a word in English, you know, but lasting time, you don't have to plant that every year. So that becomes also very environmental friendly crops. And, you know, that's good for the soil, it's good for the environment, it's good for everybody, as long as we produce those using the technology, you know, and incorporating, you know, not new technologies and not producing in the as we use, you know, preserving the soil, preserving the plants, preserving the environment.
Great, thanks. I think unless Joanna or go ahead, Joanna.
Just quickly like to say, I think everything that we're doing to help empower farmers by working together through cooperatives and then help them make contact with international buyers. I mean, the national markets are important, but it's the international markets that are really driving and bringing funding. Somebody said, how do you motivate people to plant trees? Well, you know, it's making these connections with the international agenda on climate and responsible, you know, zero deforestation, production, and that kind of thing. So the development of cooperatives and then giving those farmers a more resilient livelihoods by much diversifying their income generating and food security options. So, you know, all the suggestions in the chat are really helpful, but, you know, whatever makes sense in the context of the country that you're working in. And we've tried to, you know, add in a lot of different new income generating that generates income at different times of the year, which is very important. Over.
Great. So we've come up on time. Thanks again so much to all the panelists and to our participants and to NCBA CLUSA for really putting together a great event, and look forward to further conversations as we go forward to try to tackle the climate crisis and support farmers' livelihoods. So thanks so much, everyone. Have a good rest of the day or evening.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.